Anger does not ruin your life. Your confusion about anger does. You were trained to feel the fire, then feel ashamed of the fire. So the split begins. One part of you burns, the other part whispers. A good person would not feel this. That is the fracture. You do not suffer only because someone crossed a line. You suffer because the line was crossed, and then you judged yourself for having a human nervous system. That is the real damage. The tragedy is not anger. The tragedy is being untrained in its use. Most people were handed two terrible options: explode or suppress, become dangerous or become false, become loud or become divided. So the feeling arrives, and immediately shame arrives after it. Now the problem is no longer the original event. Now it is internal civil war. Heat in the body, condemnation in the mind, resentment waiting in the dark. And because the feeling was never given clean language, it begins looking for dirty exits. That is how one moment turns into a personality. Not because anger is evil, because confusion made it undisciplined. You know the sequence. A comment lands wrong. A tone shifts. A boundary is touched. Your jaw tightens. Your breath shortens. Your chest warms. And then the second wave arrives. Guilt. Am I overreacting? Am I too sensitive? Should I stay quiet? Should I just let it go? So you smile while your body says no. You nod while your nervous system says stop. You act civilized in public, then carry the unpaid truth home in private. That is why you are exhausted. You are not tired of conflict. You are tired of carrying undelivered truth. You are tired of editing yourself to protect everyone else from the clarity you should have spoken. That is how resentment forms. Not from one terrible event, from repeated self-betrayal, from staying pleasant past the point of honesty, from swallowing heat and calling it maturity. Then later, when the room is gone, the real conversation begins. What you should have said, what they meant, whether you imagined it, whether you had the right to feel what you felt. And the body keeps paying. Tension in the shoulders, tightness in the chest, distance with people who did nothing wrong, a sharper tone at home, exhaustion that feels larger than the original moment. But it is not larger. It is accumulated. Resentment is just anger that was denied a clean voice. Anger is rarely the disease. It is the signal. It is your internal border control telling you something was crossed. A value, a limit, a need, a line. But most people were trained to panic at the alarm instead of hearing the message. So they suppress it. And buried anger does not disappear. It ferments. It leaks out as sarcasm, coldness, passive aggression, distance, silence with teeth. That is what happens when truth is denied a disciplined form. The original anger was often clean, brief, accurate, informative. But shame distorts it. Delay corrupts it. Confusion overloads it. Then what began as a signal becomes a swamp. This is why untrained anger feels so ugly. Not because the first feeling was wrong, because the feeling was never translated into form. So the Stoic move is not suppression. It is precision, not how do I get rid of this? But what is this anger trying to protect? That question changes everything. Because the moment anger becomes information, you stop being afraid of it. And the moment you stop being afraid of it, authority begins. You stop treating anger as moral failure. You start treating it as data. Something happened. Something mattered. Something needs naming. That is the mechanism. Signal, meaning, response. And between signal and response, there is one decisive territory training. If that territory is empty, impulse rules. If that territory is disciplined, character appears. The Stoics never asked you to become stone. They asked you to become governed. Marcus Aurelius did not preach numbness. He practiced command. He understood a heavy truth. Your first surge of heat may not be your choice. Your next step is. That is where character lives. A lesser man says I was angry, so I lashed out. A sovereign man says I was angry, so I paid attention. That is the difference. Anger in a weak man becomes aggression. Anger in a trained man becomes a boundary, a signal, a line, a disciplined refusal to let the outside world violate the inside world without consequence. The Stoic is not the man who feels nothing. He is the man who refuses to let emotion seize the throne. Marcus understood that emotions arrive, but rule must remain elsewhere, not in denial, not in panic, in leadership. The mind notices, the body confirms, then the governed self decides. That order matters, because the first spark is human, the second act is moral. You are not responsible for never feeling heat. You are responsible for what the heat is allowed to become. That is Stoic authority, not the erasure of fire, the containment of fire, not pretending to be above anger, becoming honorable inside it. Feeling is not permission. That line must become law inside you. You can be furious without becoming dishonorable. You can protect your dignity without turning other people into collateral damage. You can say no without becoming cruel. This is where most people fail. They let anger carry the whole burden of their self-respect. So the feeling becomes overloaded. And once it is overloaded, it turns theatrical, louder, messier, more destructive. But strength is not volume. Strength is the gap between the feeling and the behavior. That gap is where sovereignty lives. The untrained person closes that gap instantly. Impulse becomes speech. Heat becomes harm. Pain becomes punishment. The trained person widens that gap. He notices early. He names clearly. He delivers cleanly. No courtroom speeches. No old evidence. No character assassination. No you always. No you never. Just truth. That does not work for me. That crossed a line. Do not do that again. I won't accept that. Clean truth is quieter than rage, but it lands harder because it is not trying to wound. It is trying to define reality. And once anger stops trying to punish and starts trying to protect, it becomes clean. That is when guilt begins to disappear. Not because the anger vanished, because you finally used it with honor. Picture a glowing sword in the forge. Deep amber light. Heat rising. Steel burning bright enough to look dangerous. Then the blade is lowered into water. Steam explodes upward. The room hisses. The fire resists. But the hand holding the hilt does not tremble. That is the image. The fire is not the enemy. It is the test. Uncontained, it destroys. Disciplined, it tempers the steel. The sovereign man does not put out the flame. He gives it form. He lets it strengthen the edge, not burn down the house. Picture a lamp in high wind. An unguarded flame becomes panic. A shielded flame becomes light. The issue is not heat. The issue is the hand. Authority is not the absence of fire. Authority is the fact that the hand holding it stopped shaking. That is what training does. Not less feeling. More form. Not less intensity. More command. And when the fire finally has a shape, it stops frightening you. It starts serving you. You do not need to become less human. You need rules. 1. Name it without shame. The moment anger appears, admit it internally. I am angry. I am angry because that felt disrespectful. I am angry because a line was crossed. A named emotion becomes data. A denied emotion becomes a ghost. Do not moralize the feeling. Identify it. 2. Separate feeling from behavior. Say this to yourself: I am allowed to feel this. I am responsible for what I do next. That is the rule. The heat may stay. The cruelty goes. The emotion may remain. The impulse does not get command. This is not suppression. This is inner leadership. 3. Turn anger into boundary. Do not vent. State the change. Fewer words, more truth. This does not work for me. Do not speak to me that way. If it continues, I step back. Anger becomes clean the moment it stops trying to punish and starts trying to protect. That is the conversion. From fire to form. Not every flame is destruction. Some flames are warnings. Some are guardians. Some are the only reason your dignity survived. So stop apologizing for every inner fire. The goal is not to become never angry. The goal is to become so trained that anger no longer humiliates you. You feel it. You hear it. You use it. And you remain yourself. Calm, clear, governed. That is real strength. Not the absence of anger, but the refusal to let anger make you smaller than your values. If these words found the silence in you, we will meet again on the next road.